Now, when people think about wind power, a lot of people consider it a waste of time, an idea that isn't practical, it's not going to work, and that includes, of course, certain members of this panel, one of which who is not here today, who would make such an argument. Yes, Sean, I'm talking about you. However, new technological breakthroughs in the increasing impact and cost of climate change from the burning of fossil fuels, as well as cheaper manufacturing and more efficiency, wind power is actually on par to become cheaper than fossil fuels. And that's according to one of Europe's largest utility companies. EDP, which is one of their utility companies in Europe, recently declared that wind is now considered the cheapest form of energy. They calculated that wind power was 1/3 cheaper than coal and 20% cheaper than natural gas. Now, EDP is a utility, like I said, that sells natural gas, coal, and hydropower, as well as renewables. So I don't see much of a conflict of interest and any reason for them to exaggerate the benefits of wind power and other renewables. Now, João Manso Neto, I know I butchered that name, head of EDP's renewable division, located in Portugal, told analysts in London that, quote, it's clear more and more that our product, wind energy, is good. Not only because it's green, but because it's more competitive, it's cheaper. Now, of course, these are European numbers. So what about the U.S.? Well, according to Neto, the cost difference will even be greater in America. Now, researchers at Syracuse University and the University of California recently released an analysis that shows that wind power comes within 0.35 cents or 0.35 cents per kilowatt hour when levelized over the 20-year life of a typical wind contract. Okay? So wind contracts are about 20 years in length. Now, that's compared on an equivalent basis to the full costs of natural gas-fired energy. So in a comparison, wind is just barely more expensive. Now, Jason Dedrick, who's an associate professor at Syracuse University School of Information Studies, says, quote, the true cost of electricity from wind power and natural gas are effectively indistinguishable. Yet because of the cost of carbon emissions is not included in the market price of gas, wind has not been a competitive form of energy used in most of the United States without, of course, government pricing supports in the form of subsidies. And that subsidy, of course, alludes to the production tax credit that comes at a cost of $19 billion over 10 years. Now let's remember that oil subsidies are to the tune of about $4 billion a year. So we're giving oil companies a lot more money. So what the study finds is that with the subsidy, wind costs about 9.2 cents per kilowatt hour versus 8.85 cents per kilowatt hour for gas. With carbon emissions and price volatility for gas and supply intermittency for wind factored in. And so, like I said, that's here in America while we're having a natural gas boom. So those numbers are kind of amazing. Now, the Department of Energy doesn't factor in those costs. They average about a cost of 8.7 cents per kilowatt hour for wind and 6.6 per gas. Like I said, it's because they didn't add all the other factors into the price measurements like this new analysis did. Now, I understand that I just threw a lot of information at you, and I certainly didn't have the time to cover every little detail of this analysis. And of course, I realize that wind is not a silver bullet. It obviously has its own problems and its own, issues to deal with, right? And we certainly cannot run our entire energy grid off wind. But I do think that this will help our energy crisis here in America, and not just in America, but Europe as well. So I wanted to get your opinion on this study. Should we invest more heavily into wind power? Is it as viable now as the analysis suggests? And do you think, for the final question, do you think we can ever break through the power of the fossil fuel industry in order to get projects like this through?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think it's incredible that Energies de Portugal, that they actually came out with this study and they didn't try and kind of hush it up and put it into a corner somewhere on the internet where nobody would read it. They came out and said, look, actually, wind's pretty competitive these days. And then on top of that, I think it's quite incredible that the Department of Energy in the United States, that they don't factor in, that this the price fluctuations in gas or the intermittency of wind. They're willfully ignorant. They're just not even trying. They're too lazy to even do their job properly, which astounds me. But saying that, I mean,
the Department of Energy.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, whether they're willfully doing that or just subconsciously, who's to know?
Or they're being lobbied by fossil fuels.
Yeah, I personally would reckon that they're willfully ignoring doing their job properly. But as you said, wind power certainly isn't a silver bullet. At most, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I guess you could maybe get 50-60% of America's total energy output by wind. If you threw all of the resources at it, you maybe might be able to get to 60%. But even still, if it's becoming competitive, and I mean, if you took out all the subsidies that oil and gas get, and you threw maybe just a tiny bit more money into research for wind farms and wind technology, so if you get their efficiency just a tiny bit more, then the numbers that you throw at it basically show that wind power would be more cost efficient. Currently, it's just a tiny bit below gas, but in 5-10 years' time, that it will be more efficient, and so that there's absolutely no justifiable reason now not to start throwing lots and lots of money towards kind of wind energy and get that production going in the United States, and particularly in Europe as well. I mean, people always say, oh, if it's too windy, then the wind farms won't work, and they're not very efficient. Well, this study proves that they are efficient. They're just as efficient, essentially, as using natural gas. So why the hell don't we start investing in it?
All right, Nick.
Those are all great points. I don't know if it's willful ignorance. I think to an extent it probably is that it's not getting any real coverage or traction. I think a lot of it is also just flat out plain, they're not looking kind of ignorance. Not like they know it's there, they're not, but they're going to feign not knowing. No, they haven't even bothered looking. Maybe it's the same thing, I forget. But I think part of the problem is among a lot of people still there's this perception of wind energy farms as a massive eyesore. And I honestly don't know how much we can discount that as an issue for some people in and really wanting to pour money into it. But inevitably we're going to have to bite the bullet. We're going to have to get much more renewable energy sources. And wind, solar, and for me the big one that I think is going to be great, and we have the technology, we have the research invested into it to make it better, is nuclear power. I think that's going to be a huge, huge sustainable energy market in the coming years. So,
and with every, of course, form of energy, there's going to be a lot of drawbacks, and we've seen a lot of the drawbacks when it comes to nuclear. But Stephen and I were actually talking before the show about the coming fusion power, which I think is super, super fascinating. I consider myself, of course, a huge sci-fi nerd, so I think of like fusion power, and I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, I mean, currently, just to go off what Jeff's saying, before the show we were talking about the ITER project, which started in Japan. It's a fusion reactor that basically does fusion reactions between heavy water deuterium and tritium. And it's completely kind of carbon neutral, basically just produces water at the end of the day. They've currently got a fusion power plant that's being constructed in Marseille in France at the moment, and it's due to come online in 2027. It's been held back through because of lack of funding and so on and so forth. But it's even more efficient than nuclear reaction. It's safer as well, or purportedly safer. But going back to with the wind power and it being an eyesore, that's been a huge issue here in the UK because England's kind of rolling green hills and everything. People complaining, oh, we don't want these massive white fans dotted around our landscape. It'll make it, we can't take any nice postcard photos and stuff. And in some places, if you have a national park or something, then yeah, you don't want to scatter them with wind farms, but you can put them offshore. You can have offshore wind farms. And another thing as well, you've got the solar, you've got the wind, tidal energy as well. In America, you've got the Hoover Dam, essentially powers all of Las Vegas. You build a couple of dams. We've got the Seven Thames barrier here that produces electrical energy. You've got a large coastline in America. You can create a lot of energy off tidal power as well. You've got so many, and not just America, the entire world has got so many options at its disposal. And because of kind of advances in technology, they're becoming more and more efficient, more and more cost effective. Within the next 5 years, it really is going to be the tipping point where you have to start throwing money at these projects and at these sources of energy, simply because they're more efficient. You want to save money that way, and of course, save the planet.
Mm-hmm. I love the NIMBY crowd, the not in my backyard crowd. It always kind of irritates me because it's like, if this is something that's going to help, do you think you could make me look a little bit past your own yard? And I don't know, that always irritates me. But a good example of NIMBY actually going back to like somebody who was oil and gas, and I forget who this politician was, very pro oil, very pro gas. He was actually suing to get a fracking rig, or it was either a fracking rig or an oil rig out of his.
He was like, I think he was actually the CEO of one of those major fracking, or the vice CEO of one of the major fracking companies, and then he sued a company that was fracking near his backyard because it was an eyesore.
Yeah, exactly. Which is that's fucking awesome, by the way, and just greatly ironic. So I just wanted to point out that, the NIMBY crowd, that's one of the biggest things that obstacles that you're going to have, other, of course, than the elephant in the room, and that's, of course, the oil and gas industry that is going to fight this tooth and nail. But you can see that, they don't have to. They can profit from this as well, just like EDP. I mean, EDP is an energy company. It's an energy utility company that's getting a lot of their, energy from coal and natural gas, and even they're like, yeah, it's super competitive, dude. We're going to invest in this, and you guys should too, because there's money in this, and it's reduced risk. I mean, how much money do oil companies have to pay out for damages? Coal companies for, people getting black lung and shit and coal mining accidents. That would cut down on all of that stuff. It's just a good investment. Even if you're an energy company.
Yeah, and Energy to Portugal is completely right. Saying it's low risk. Someone like Putin, who does control kind of a lot of the oil flow and gas flow into most of Western Europe, he can't control the wind. He's not God, even though God doesn't control the wind. But you get my point. And I'm sure none of us, or I'm certainly not making the argument that, and I'm sure EDP aren't going to say, right, we're going to stop all oil, we're going to just focus on wind now. No, they're going to slowly phase it out as it becomes more and more efficient and more business savvy to invest in these projects. It's not just going to flick a switch overnight. No one's making that argument that the entire American electrical grid is going to be shifted to a different source overnight. No, it's going to take a decade or two to happen. But the start of that process has to happen right now.
It does. That's an excellent point.
I just have to say, Stephen, have you met Putin? Oh Lord, he could definitely control the wind. Don't even try and pretend that's not the case. But no, I think you raise actually a very good point. The geopolitical point of the issue is that given the increased tension with Russia, we're at the highest point as far as Russian Western Europe tension goes since the end of the Cold War. I guarantee you that people are going to start definitely looking for alternative sources of energy than having to buy oil and gas from Russia. So.